Many years ago, my grandfather began crafting 6 toy dump trucks that have been tucked away in a box, in darkness, half completed, waiting patiently under my workbench. Originally intended for his 6 grandchildren, this project, once cradled in his calloused hands, now rests before me, a bridge across the years. And so with love and reverence I complete what he began. These heirlooms, once stalled by time, will roll into the hands of my children, nieces, and nephews. They will load them with acorns, pebbles, and drive them through their storied imaginations. And when they ask, who made this? I'll tell them of their great-grandfather, the craftsman. No plans or blueprints were left from which to work, so I carefully evaluated the components to determine their future. I don't know what Granddad's vision was, but I imagined the bold and elegant curves of the 1930 Ford AA truck. And that was the most intriguing aspect of this project, my task of making the unfinished complete. So with each kiss from my chisel and stroke from my plane, the past merges with the future, and these toy trucks embark on a new journey. I began by milling rough lumber, turning these planks and scraps into usable boards that would mainly become the dumper. The frame of the truck is all made out of white oak, so I thought the rich color of the sapele for the dumper would contrast the body and match the grille quite well. So I ended up with a number of these half-inch thick boards of varying length that still needed to be turned into parts. I started with the dumper first, ripping all of these to 1 3/8 inch wide strips, then cross-cut 12 of those strips to 6 3/8 inches long for the sides of the dumper and 12 to 5.5 inches long. In order to add some depth to the sides of the dumper, I threw my dado blade in the table saw and cut a 7/8 inch wide groove an 1/8 of an inch deep down the middle. Otherwise, the sides would have felt too mundane. Then I cross-cut the other 12 pieces to 4.5 inches long, which would be the tailgate and the front of the dumper. I labeled pairs of the dumper sides, and as any good woodworker does, proceeded to make things more complicated than they needed to be. To join the sides to the front, a simple butt joint just wouldn't do. Instead, I decided to use a box joint. I cut the sockets and cut one test of the pins, and believe it or not, I messed it up. I didn't consider that when I cut the dado in the middle of the side of the dumper, the adjoining piece also needed to be shorter. As you can see, it was too wide, so I had to go back and trim these pieces to be 1/4 of an inch shorter. After that, I cut the pins, which didn't end up exactly in the middle. Then I planed the excess off the top so that when the joint fit together, it was flush with the sides. Next, I began working on the tailgate, aiming to make it functional. I cut notches on the bottom that were the same width as the side pieces, leaving a tab at the top that would allow the tailgate to nestle in between the sides of the dumper. I then cut a corresponding notch out of the top of the sides to accept the tab on the tailgate. Then I drilled a 1/4 inch hole inside the dumper sides and into both ends of the tailgate. This allowed me to put a dowel in so that when everything was glued together, the tailgate could pivot to open and close. I probably should have drilled the holes in the ends of the tailgate before cutting the tab at the top because it took a lot of finagling to get it right, but it ended up okay. What didn't end up okay was that the holes I drilled in all the left dumper sides didn't align with the holes drilled in the tailgates, so I had to glue dowels in and re-drill them. I got it right the second time though, thanks to these handy dowel pins, which I had too much pride to purchase before now. Thought if I ever needed them, I'd be clever enough to whip something together made out of scraps, but I swallowed my pride, and somehow all the pieces of the dumper now lined up with the dowels and fit together perfectly. Then so the tailgates could open, I rounded over their outside bottom edges with the router. I set the round over bit deep enough to leave a lip because I thought it would look nice, but it prevented the tailgate from closing all the way, so I planed it down. On the dumper sides, I rounded off the bottom edge of the notch that I cut out earlier. The last thing I did on the dumper was creating a profile on the sides by taking a thin cutoff and using it to create an angle with my block plate. It was an impulse design change that I hadn't planned to do, inspired by finding this cutoff on my workbench. I set aside all the dumper parts and moved on to making doors. This was very simple, just rectangular pieces of white oak that I took to the scroll saw to cut out windows. Then I smoothed out the inside and removed some of the burn marks with the file. I milled some walnut and white oak to create the wheels, which I thought was the coolest part of this project. The wheels were 2 1/4 inches in diameter with a 1 1/2 inch hubcap that will go in the middle. So the first step was drilling out the center with a Forstner bit. Each of these walnut boards was barely large enough to squeeze out 4 wheels. Next up was using this knuckle buster of a drill bit to make my wheels. So you drill in from one side about halfway, flip over your workpiece, and then drill in again, lining up the pilot hole, and you pull off your circle. So now I had 2 dozen wooden chocolate donuts. You know what goes well with donuts? Snickerdoodles. So I made some of those too.
Yum!
I put the walnut wheels on a 4-inch long bolt secured by nuts and put it in a drill chuck on the lathe so I could turn them and create the right shape. First I used a parting tool on the outside and inside edges, and then I used a gouge to round the area in between, which was meant to make it look like the wall of the tire was sitting on a rim. And on half of them I also used a skew chisel to make treads, which came out looking really good. For the hubcaps, I marked on the side to the depth of the hole I drilled in the center of the walnut wheel, so I could make them into a conical shape where the base of the hubcap fit below the rim of the wheel. And here's what the hubcaps look like off the lathe. For the spokes of the hubcap, I made this jig, which is 5 half-inch holes, each drilled 72 degrees apart on the edge of the larger 1 1/2 inch hole. To prevent the hubcap from moving while I drilled each of the 5 holes for the spokes, I drilled halfway through the underside of a piece of plywood and set a bolt in it. Then I put a spacer and my hubcap on top, secured with a washer, and tightened it with a nut. I could then place the jig over the top and drill each of the 5 holes with the hubcap locked in place so each spoke was exactly the same. After doing that only 23 more times, I set the wheels and hubcaps aside and moved on to the wheel fenders. I measured and drew out the shape and made 12 paper copies that I stuck to a board with spray adhesive. Then I cut out the rough shape at the bandsaw and tried using a plywood template and a flush trim bit in the router to make these, but that failed miserably, so I went back to the bandsaw to cut them all out. Then I smoothed out the bandsaw marks with a file, focusing mostly on the curved areas because I am lacking in the spindle sander department, and then took care of the rest with a 1-inch belt sander with 150 grit sandpaper, then used some 220 by hand to finish them out. To this point, I hadn't actually done anything with the body of the trucks or any of the other parts that came with it. I had just made my own parts to be added on. So this was the point of no return when I sunk my drill bits into the truck body for the wheels and the underside of the dumper. Needless to say, I measured very carefully. So now I'd made a whole bunch of parts for this dump truck and finally began putting them all together. This is the bottom of the dumper and a little block that serves as the point at which the dumper attaches to the body and pivots up and down. 2 of them arrived pre-assembled, so I only had to glue 4 together. I bought some axle pegs from Amazon that fed into the holes that were already drilled into the blocks and glued them to the underside of the dumper. I took some axle pegs and cut off the heads to glue them into the holes I drilled at the opposite end of the bottom of the dumper. This made it so that when the dumper was down, there was about 1/8 of an inch gap between it and the truck body. It also makes it a little bit quieter when children slam the dumper down. Then I sanded the hubcaps, preparing them for getting glued into the wheels. And I have to say I'm very pleased with how these turned out. The hubcaps nestled perfectly into the wheels and made the trucks look overall much better and added to the feeling of it being heirloom quality. Next on the assembly line was gluing together the dumper and attaching it to its base. I first glued together the 3 sides with box joints, the front and the 2 sides. Then I spread some glue on the bottom of these 3 pieces to glue onto the base before working in the tailgate that pivots on the dowels. Then I took the whole thing and set it down on the base. If you notice, there's a slot for a biscuit that was cut on the top of the dumper base. I thought long and hard about what the intended purpose was of that, but I never did figure it out. All the parts seemed much too small to warrant biscuit joints, so I just covered it up. And now I still only had a slightly smaller big pile of parts, including dumpers, wheel fenders, wheels, and doors. Before I closed off the cab with the doors, I needed to apply finish inside because otherwise it was going to be impossible to reach everything in there. It was difficult enough without the doors. And there was some really great detail inside the cab. You can see a steering wheel, pedals, and a shifter. I also applied finish to the interior of the doors at the same time, and after that dried, I glued the doors in place and used a sawdust mixture to fill in some of the small gaps that I had, and then I sanded it smooth. When I glued on the wheel fenders, I stuck a front wheel on, not glued in or anything, but just there so that as I glued the fender on, I could make sure it fit over the wheel properly and didn't interfere with it turning. And here I'm putting the second fender on, which was a little difficult to clamp in the right place after the first one was already on the other side. Once the glue on the fenders dried, I put the truck upside down in my vise and hit it with the block plane so the fenders were flush with the bottom of the body of the truck. I also gave this little area a quick sanding with some 220 grit sandpaper and the body was ready for finish. Danish oil was my finish of choice for this project, and for no specific reason, I did the wheels first and then moved to finishing the truck bodies and the dumpers, all separately because they hadn't been assembled yet. And I really love it when a project is done and when all that's left is applying finish, you have a grand reveal of sorts. You get to watch it transform from something bland and muted to something vibrant with rich colors. But this wasn't one of those projects. I had to apply the finish prior to having everything together because I wouldn't be able to get the finish into all the nooks and crannies if it was assembled first. Even then, there was still some mystery left in this project, not knowing when all assembled how it would look. But applying finish to all of these parts certainly got me excited about what the final result would reveal. I secured the dumper to the truck body with some 1/4-inch dowels and steps so that I could align the holes in the truck body and dumper. I drove in the dowel a little bit first, slid the dumper in, and drove the dowel in more to hold the dumper in place, and added some glue on the other side and hammered the dowel in the rest of the way. And I don't know if that little bit of glue makes any difference because the dowel is a pretty tight fit, but it helps me sleep better at night. When I cut the dowels, I made them longer than I needed, so there was extra sticking out of either side. I trimmed that extra at the bandsaw first and made it flush with the truck body using my block plane. Lastly, I christened the dump trucks with their wheels. I dabbed some glue on a toothpick and smeared it inside the holes I drilled and pressed the wheels on with the axle pegs. I then brushed some Danish oil on the visible part of the axle pegs after they were glued in, and I was done. I then packed them into a couple of boxes to bring to a family gathering to hand out to my kids, nieces, and nephews. The next morning, as the sun arose and cast long shadows across the floor, I stepped back and marveled at this transformation. Once fragments of Granddad's vision, these trucks, now with their wheels aligned and their beds waiting for imaginary loads of adventure, will witness new stories. These dump trucks were more than just toys. They are vessels of memories and a preservation of Granddad's passion for building. So this journey that began with him and found its completion in me is the tale of two hands, one weathered, one eager, working together across time, a legacy I am honored to complete.